Coming up tonight in the Cruise View, we set sail once again, this time on the Jewel of the Seas. Plus, you gotta go from somewhere, so we're gonna take a look at Vancouver, where it all begins. Now, let's set sail. Welcome to another sailing of the Cruise View, this time on board the Jewel of the Seas. Today, Friday, September 18th, is the first day of her 8-night repositioning voyage to transfer from Vancouver to Los Angeles for a series of sailings before ultimately returning to her winter home port down in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Over the summer, she's been running 7-night sailings between Vancouver and Alaska, and today is a repositioning that will take her down the Pacific coast. So for this sailing, over the next 8 days, we're going to be covering a very port-intensive itinerary. That includes, of course, today in Vancouver, followed by tomorrow in Victoria, and then a day in Astoria, the only sea day, and then an overnight stay in San Francisco, followed by a stop in Monterey, and then Santa Barbara, before ultimately ending in Los Angeles. So, heading all the way down the west coast from top to bottom, basically, covering every inch of the continent. And of course, this is a very different itinerary than the last two sailings, which both featured heavy sea days. So that means a very different format for the Cruise View. And traditionally the Cruise View has focused on the ship aspect, featuring the venues, the dining, the different activities on board the ship. But the less time there is on board the ship, the less time there is to actually film that stuff. So with this series, we're going to be changing things up a little bit, focus a lot more on those ports of call, a little more about what activities are going on, and it's going to have a much more organic feel to it. We're not going to have as many produced segments and no interviews this time. Instead, all the dining and venue tours will be integrated right into the compass as part of the daily activities that go on. And we'll also be taking a look at, of course, that port of call each day, since that really is the main feature of this sailing. But before we even get into the sailing, the first port of call is obviously Vancouver, where we left from. And for me, we arrived on Wednesday about 9:30 p.m. and we stayed at the Vancouver Marriott Pinnacle Downtown, which is about 2 blocks from the actual cruise port. So it was not a very far walk this morning to get to the ship. And being that close to the port, we of course had nice views of the whole area, including the ability to actually see the Jewel of the Seas arrive into port this morning. But beyond the actual hotel, we did also have, of course, Thursday in Vancouver, which meant we had some time to actually do some of our own excursions. One of the things that's located only about a block away from the actual cruise port is the 2010 Winter Olympics Cauldron. That is still right there. You can still go visit it, see it just like it was back in 2010, of course not lit anymore. And being up here in Vancouver, while we are not sailing to Alaska, there is some whale watching around. Most of it seems to be centered around Victoria, which of course is our stop tomorrow. But we took the extra day in Vancouver and did an excursion with Vancouver whale watching to go check that out. It lasted roughly 5 hours, and they offered a shuttle that left directly from Canada Place, the actual cruise terminal for today. So it was very easy to get to the actual whale watching, and in those 5 hours we saw several different species of animals, including sea lions,
phytoplankton and zooplankton that gets fed on by fish, which gets fed on by larger fish and seals, birds of various kinds, and we do sometimes also see porpoises in here, harbor porpoises quite commonly.
And of course, when going whale watching, the most important part, orcas. The other item that we chose to do yesterday during our Vancouver day was fly over Canada. If you've ever been to Epcot at Disney World or to Disney's California Adventure out in California, you probably rode on Soaring, and that is basically what Fly Over Canada is. It's a third-party interpretation of that, except instead of featuring California, it of course features Canada. It's about $20 Canadian, and you get right on the hang gliders just like you would on the Disney version and fly around Canada to see the different sites and get an understanding of what this country actually looks like. So that is a nice little one. It's a little pricey when you consider how much Disney costs, but if you're visiting Canada, don't know much about it, it is a nice way to sort of see the whole country. And so that brings us to today, where the Jewel of the Seas did of course arrive in Vancouver this morning, traveling very slowly through the bay. About 6:30 a.m. she came into view of my hotel room and ultimately docked at 7 a.m. And the weather for today, we had a sunrise at 7:05 a.m. just after she docked, and a sunset tonight at 7:31 p.m. The high for the day was only 61 degrees, and we had cloudy skies with a listed afternoon shower, but for the most part it seemed to mist and drizzle all morning, and by about 2 o'clock it was clear and remained clear the rest of the day. So it was a little bit wet trying to get to the ship this morning, but it was nice for the sail away this evening. So of course she arrived at 7 a.m. this morning, and boarding began a little bit later. They started accepting the luggage about 10:30 a.m. and it seemed like guests started getting on at about 11 a.m. The terminal in Vancouver is actually located in Canada Place, which, unlike most ports, is not a standalone cruise terminal. It is actually part of a convention center, hotel. The Flyover Canada is located here. The World Trade Center is here. It is a huge multi-purpose complex, and the cruise terminal is actually located underneath it. So when you show up, it is a little bit confusing to locate where exactly you're supposed to go. But once you find the signs, just keep following them. They lead you right underneath, and it is a very smooth process. It's one of the older ones. It doesn't have any of the new oasisizing features that came out back in 2010, such as taking your photo right at the counter. It's still doing it when you're checking on with your card. But overall, for how many people they had to bring on today, it was a very smooth process. At no point were there bottlenecks or backups. Really, I'm not sure what caused it, but it seemed to be very well spread out throughout the day. I don't think there were any points where it truly got crowded, so it was a very well-flowing process to get people on the ship, even though it was the old version that we haven't really seen in a couple of years. And of course, once we got on the ship, things continued to run smooth. In general, today was a very well-organized day, both on the ship and on the port side. Everything down to the muster drill just seemed to be very smoothly run. So let's jump right into our compass summary while we're at it. So today was the first day of this 8-night sailing, and it is port intensive, so that normally means less time to do activities on the ship, and they seem to take advantage of today and actually loaded it with a couple items to do even before the ship left port. So the first was at 2:30 there was a short excursion talk. I never attend them. I usually don't mention them because they are on every sailing, but typically they've come on day 2. Obviously day 2 being a port of call day meant that they bumped it to the first day, and that occurred at 2:30. The muster drill came at 4:30, and that was a very quick one. It was over by about 4:45, so roughly 15 minutes. On both the Grandeur and the Quantum, typically after 15 minutes, they're just getting started on the actual muster drill. So to have the total time be about 15-20 minutes was significantly faster than any of the previous sailings that we've experienced recently. So that was impressive to see for once. And that meant that we had plenty of time to prepare for our sail away at 5 p.m. Promptly at 5 p.m. we started backing out of Canada Place, turned out towards the bay, and it was roughly 30 to 40 minutes later that we finally passed under the bridge. She did travel at a very slow pace of about 6 knots at points. Leading up to that it was probably much slower, but tomorrow we are headed to Victoria, which is not very far away. When we did the whale watching, we actually went past Victoria, so she does not have to go very quickly, and at 6 knots, it is a noticeably slow pace that we are currently traveling at. And as soon as we passed under that bridge, it was time to rush off to dinner. Being the first night, we are on the Mojo menu for the evening, and this is the traditional dining system with the 14 different menus. We'll see 8 of them this sailing. If you haven't seen the Grandeur series, each night featured a different version of that menu and went through all the different features. For this sailing, instead of focusing as much on it to save a little time, it's going to be focused more on the items that I ate on a particular day off of the menu. And of course you'll be able to see the menu on the screen, but I'm not going to devote an entire segment to it just because there are already segments and it will be redundant since we did 10 different menus with Grandeur and only 8 of those will be featured here. So with tonight's Mojo menu, for me, I started with the toasted farro and lamb broth, which is traditional soup. Usually I go for the soups. And I followed that up with the Mojo marinated grilled pork chop. And for dessert, the sugar-free strawberry charlotte. For the first night, in my opinion, the food was presented very well. The meat across the board seemed to be a little bit lower quality than we saw in the Quantum and the Grandeur. Hoping that's just a first night thing and it'll improve, but it wasn't. While the taste was up to par, the quality of the meat itself that they used did not seem on par with what we've seen in the past. And that could be a West Coast versus East Coast thing, because I'm sure they source it from a slightly different place. The strawberry charlotte, on the other hand, was without a doubt the best I've had of that, and that is one of those desserts that I typically get every sailing, so that was a nice one. Immediately following dinner, and of course we had to rush to it, was the Welcome Aboard show at 7:15, and that was a single showing for the entire ship, which is why you had to rush to it, because it fell right in between first and second seating. So at 7:15, it started off with our cruise director, Dennis Charles, and the Royal Caribbean singers and dancers, putting on a quick little routine and going over some of the information that everyone would need to know for the sailing, going through a couple introductions, basic meet and greet that you would expect at the welcome show. And then that was followed up with comedian Steve Chafer, who did his first show of the sailing. He'll be back tomorrow night to do a second adult-only version. Tonight's was, of course, family-friendly since it was the main theater headliner for the evening. And, as usual, with pretty much all the acts that Royal Caribbean has been getting, this was, once again, another enjoyable show that was designed for the entire family. It had stuff for all ages to enjoy, so it was another quality show, and that was held in the Choral Theater. Throughout this series, instead of featuring specific venues each night and going through a whole segment on them, as a venue comes up and is a significant portion of the day, I will devote a little more time to discuss them in the natural flow of things. So today that will be the Choral Theater that I'll go in a little more on. And this is, of course, the main theater on the ship. The Radiance class is slightly bigger than the Grandeur and the Vision class, but it is significantly smaller than the Voyager, Freedom, or even the Quantum class. And while those ships all featured a similar design, and the Grandeur had more of an old-fashioned showroom style feel to it with a balcony, this had a very modern movie theater style feel to it. It was very surprising in my opinion. I was expecting something very similar to what we saw in the Voyager class, something that looked more in line with the rest of the fleet, but it was a very one-off feeling theater. The seating was very steep, so you had great views no matter where you were. It felt very intimate compared to many of the other theaters, and the balcony was very one-sided. The entire venue was really facing towards the stage and not really as big of a curve as we're used to on some of the bigger ships. So it was a very small, more intimate venue, and one of the things that people mentioned following the Quantum series was that they did have the air conditioning on the Radiance class in the seats, and I confirmed to myself it was there. Right in the back of each seat was an air conditioning vent to cool you off while you're watching the shows. And for tonight, that was only about a 45-minute show. Most of the ones in here will be, so it probably isn't a big deal, but it is one of those nice things that is there. And while the theater does seat 915 people, which is less than half the capacity of the ship, tonight's show, while only one for the whole ship, was very empty. So I'm not sure, a lot of people may have skipped the welcome show, may have conflicted with dinners, but it was a very empty one. We'll see how crowded the other ones are. And then following that, there were a couple different activities throughout the ship tonight. But the one that I'm going to feature at 10 o'clock tonight was the Movie Character Game Show. This is another one of their family game shows that they often do during the 10 p.m. slots like we saw in the Vision class with the Grandeur. And this is one that I have not seen before. It's basically showing pictures of different people from historic films and having a contestant guess who the actual character name is, not the actor, but the actual name of that character. And if they get it correct, then they keep getting incrementally better prizes. If they get it wrong, they lose their prizes, or they can choose to leave with what they have at that point. So it was a rather entertaining game show. It didn't get a very big crowd. It's the first night, though. A lot of people tend to go to bed early on the first night, so we'll see if these games get a better crowd throughout the sailing. I know on the Quantum, I kept mentioning a lot that the shows didn't get a big crowd, but this one really was in the right venue. It has the right time slot. I'm not sure. I think it's just the first night. People don't quite know what to do yet, so we'll see if they get better crowds, because I know looking at tomorrow's comments, there is another family-friendly game show at 10 p.m. And of course, tomorrow is our first port of call with Victoria at 7 a.m., which is a very short ride from Vancouver, where we were today. And of course, we'll be pulling in 7 a.m. around the time the sun rises, so hopefully we'll get a nice view. The weather overall for the time of here has been cloudy. It looks like it may be that way again tomorrow, but we'll see. Hopefully we'll get some good weather. And of course, I'll be covering all that in tomorrow's episode, so be sure to come back and check that out.